Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about a law review paper that I have done with my postdoc. I talked yesterday some about the idea that you have to talk to the policymakers. The policymakers don't read our papers. So this is on strict limitations on the use of communications metadata and telemetry information. It's focusing on smartphones, communications metadata, and telemetry. Why? Because it's impossible to live in the modern world without your phone, a smartphone. You can't book a plane flight, you can't do a VPN, you can't do lots of things anymore without a smartphone. It's ubiquitous and unavoidable, and users have no ability to control the use of to control the collection of communications metadata, and typically they don't have any ability to control the collection and use of device and software telemetry. So let me go back in history about 40 years. Once upon a time, whether it was AT&T, the monopoly phone company in the United States, or the monopolies in other parts of the world, they collected communications metadata, and they did it for several different purposes. They did it for delivery of service. They did it for testing quality of service, how much content was going through, were the dial tones coming up at the right time, and so on. They did it for investigating fraud, and they did it for modeling future provision of service, and they also did it for charging customers. That was once upon a time. But from the mid-1990s on, so some of you don't remember the mid-1990s, some of you don't remember the mid-2000s. From the mid-1990s on, we've seen dropping costs of storage, dropping costs in search, and availability of non-content data. We've seen deployment of cell phones, use of IP-based communications, and deployment of smartphones. So you're carrying around, as all of you know, both a cell phone and a smartphone. Most users don't realize that they're carrying around phones that are often on two different networks. In addition to communications metadata, and I should say here that communications metadata, IP metadata, is much richer than communications metadata, the PSTN data, public switch telephone network data. IP metadata can reveal, for example, in an encrypted VoIP call, what language you're speaking, what gender the person is, sometimes even what words they're saying. There's also a new type of data that comes from smartphones. The new type of data is both software telemetry. The companies want to know how well is that software working, and so they get data from the software about how well it's working. That is, the operating system sometimes does, sometimes the manufacturer does. How is the user using the device so that they can improve the software later? And there's also device telemetry. So device telemetry, so that your phone displays properly, it has an accelerometer, it has a gyroscope so that you can use it for mapping functions. It has a magnetometer so that you can hold it by your ear and not press buttons that disrupt your call. Proximity sensor, battery sensor. That stuff is really useful for the phone, for the phone functioning. If you're doing augmented reality and virtual reality, it's also useful for that stuff has to go off the phone. But that stuff goes off the phone even if you're not doing augmented and virtual reality. There's been a series of papers at IEEE S&P and other meetings. There's been a really good study of a small group of apps from the Norwegian Consumer Council that looks at the data going off the phone and who it's going to. It's going to companies like Grindr. Why does that matter? Because you can shut off GPS on your phone, but if magnetometer, accelerometer, and gyroscope data is collected, you can be tracked not only to which building you go to, but whether you go to the abortion clinic or whether you go to the dermatologist. It tracks inside the building. It can track that you are traveling with somebody else and you've left the bar together, you shut off GPS, but you take the same Uber, and then you walk into the same apartment building, and then you go to the same floor. I'll leave you there. But the point of all of this is that we know that the companies have patents on this stuff. Whether they're using it's hard to know, except that I have told you about the results from IEEE. That is, I've sketched that the results exist and so on. What can be learned? All the stuff over here and more. So how can a user protect her privacy? The answer is she can't. Communications metadata has to go off the phone. And notice and choice, which is what privacy policies are about, Notice and choice can't possibly work in this situation. The amount of queries that a user would get is just unreasonable. And while I can tell you guys that accelerometer plus gyroscope plus magnetometer tracks somebody inside a building, and you all believe me because you're all scientists and engineers, you tell it to a politician, you tell it to your nephew, you tell it to your aunt, nope, they don't get it. So, bottom line of our law review paper, ISPs, and I apologize for the picture of the capital, but laws happen in states, and so they have to happen in different nation states. ISPs, OS providers, platforms, and apps should not be permitted to use metadata and telemetry. Too strong, obviously. They shouldn't be able to use metadata and telemetry except for the same kind of AT&T uses, plus during a publicly declared health emergency of a short period. Location data is really essential when you're trying to track where people have fled during a hurricane or an earthquake. And also for providing information for a public or peer-reviewed research project in which the data is anonymized. And with that, I'll say this is a radical departure in privacy law, but the use of metadata and telemetry information is in this way, tracking users to discover their interests, who they're with, their personality, and so on, is a radical departure of the use of users' private data, and for which they have no capability for controlling use and in some ways collection. And if you want to hear more, the paper will be out next month in the Colorado Journal of Technology Law Journal. Thank you.
Great.
And it's very long. I apologize.
Okay, so David is up now, and Jason is up after that.
I am going to teach you one little known fact, and I'm going to throw out one free research idea, which would make a really good foci paper, for example. The crux of this is that I believe Tor metrics may be slightly overestimating the number of Tor users, but I don't have a lot of strong evidence for that yet. Who has seen a graph like this? And who thinks they know what this graph means? These Tor metric graphs are almost universally misinterpreted. This looks like you would say, oh, Tor gets 2.5 million unique users per day. That is not what this graph says. It's a little known fact. This is your little known fact next time you look at a Tor metrics graph. If you go into the guide for reproducible metrics, it tells you what those numbers actually mean. And it says, due to the nature of Tor, we cannot collect identifying data. We don't actually count users, but we count requests to the directories or bridge that clients make periodically. The result is an average number of concurrent users. We can't say how many distinct users there are. So what you're seeing there when it says 2.5 million, that means if you pick a random point in time on that day, on average there will be 2.5 million people connected at the same time. So that means generally there will be more unique users because not every user is connected through the full 24 hours. It's the product. What we're really looking at is user days. We're not looking at users. It's the product of how long people are connected, because that's what the number of requests measures, times the number of people. And I say people, users, bots, whatever. So there, now you know how to interpret those Tor metrics graphs. But even given that that is not really a count of users, there's kind of a funny thing. If you also go into the reproducible metrics guide, you'll see this formula. They take the number of direct requests, they divide by frac, which you can ignore, just treat that as 1.0, and then they divide by 10. Where does that magic number 10 come from? Well, it's basically just based on intuition. It's kind of a scaling factor. It's just built into the formula to adjust number of requests to number of users, and it's based on assumptions of how long the typical user stays connected to Tor per day. And they say a typical user stays connected 1/10 of a day. That's the intuition behind this, about 2.5 hours. Here you can actually see in the Tor metric source code, that's where that number 10 appears. That is the code that created that graph, and that's got that magic number 10. You can change this number and it makes the graphs bigger or smaller linearly. So the question is this the right number? Well, how could we estimate this? My idea is to do this by measuring connected sockets at bridges. Tor bridges are special because they do not get connections from other relays, they only get connections from users. So if we count TCP sockets, we're actually counting users. In particular, on pluggable transport bridges, the pluggable transport receives a connection. It makes a loop-back TCP connection to Tor, and we can just count sockets on that link, on that localhost link, to count how many users are currently connected. So I've been doing this just on a very, very pilot basis on 2 of the Snowflake bridges, just for curiosity and to motivate this talk. Run this command. Sorry, this is wrong. This should not say SSH. This should say SS. That's a program to list the currently connected sockets. I've been doing that with 5-minute granularity for the past few weeks on 2 of the Snowflake bridges. So there's a first Snowflake bridge and second Snowflake bridge. Notice the different vertical scales. The red line at the top is the number that Tor Metrics will tell you, and then the sort of bluish line is the number of sockets that I'm counting on the bridge. So the red line is actually higher. I think it's overestimating in this case, at least of these Snowflake bridges. If we look at that in a scatter plot, this is what it looks like. You see the axis label here. The horizontal axis is the number of users as reported by Tor Metrics, and the vertical axis is the number of currently connected sockets. So this is about a 2-to-1 ratio on one of the bridges, and the other bridge, a little bit less used, has about a 1.5 to 1 ratio. Have some hypotheses as to why the ratio is not the same, but we can talk about that. So the idea here is that you want to do a research project, you could get this same measurement thing deployed on a bunch of other bridges. Some of the default OBS4 bridges might be a good choice. Collect and collate some of that data, see if you can explain why these ratios might be different, and see if you can come up with some sort of happy medium that would adjust that scaling factor appropriately. That's all, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And Jason is up now, and I am up after Jason. And after me is Rob.
Hey, I'm Jason Cronk. I am president of an organization called the Institute of Operational Privacy Design. We started about 2 years ago to try to create standards around privacy by design, partly out of my frustration of companies saying they do privacy by design and not really doing much, or maybe doing something really well, but not doing a lot of things that great. We have already produced one standard earlier this year. It is a standard for your design or development process, and we are working on a second standard that would apply specifically to product, services, or business processes. So kind of the end result of your design process. So one of the problems around standards is a lot of standards in privacy outside of academia, like they list a bunch of things that you're supposed to do, like data minimization, transparency, maybe include state-of-the-art pets or something along those lines. But then there is kind of this implicit thing that if you do that, you're doing privacy, or you're doing privacy by design, but it's like questionable about the what's in between there. So we are looking at something called a structured assurance case, and there's several different methods of doing structured assurance cases. There is goal structuring notation, and there is what's presented here, which is claim argument evidence. Whereas you make a claim, you present arguments, and you have evidence to that. It's very similar to like a legal case, where you're making arguments and you're presenting evidence and trying to claim somebody is guilty or innocent or something to that effect. And similarly, this is not a guarantee. This is an assurance. So like in a legal case, you would have a standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, preponderance of evidence, something like that. So it's a way of connecting that evidence to that claim. So this is most prominent in use for the last couple of decades in safety assurance cases, where you're trying to say that a particular plane or particular design for something is safe, and you might have arguments that in different operating modes it's safe, and then you provide evidence to that. And it's not just a strict line like that. There may be sub-arguments and sub-claims and such going up to that. And like I said, there is a potentially like a probabilistic argument that your claim is correct. For instance, in airline safety, they use something on the order of 100 million to a billion flights would be safe. And if you look at something like the Airbus A320, they've done 62 million flights. So you need something of that magnitude. So like I said, we're looking at assurance cases, ultimately supporting a claim of privacy by design and default. Won't go through this, and this is still like really early in development, but we're thinking about like looking at, well, have privacy risks been addressed, and what does it mean to address privacy risks? It means to mitigate them or eliminate them, and then maybe there's a countervailing benefit, and then the by default part is maybe that the delivered state of the system is at the lowest risk state, and then you have to provide evidence to support that. Again, this is really early on. And ultimately, we're trying to make try and provide a structured, good faith argument that the evidence of what you've done ultimately supports this claim of privacy by design and default. There's some opportunities. We really would like to see more research in privacy assurance cases. I found one paper from 2016, some smart cities conference. There was a master's thesis that I can't find the actual article or paper, but that seems to be out there. So there's some opportunity out there for doing privacy risk assurance case research. Privacy assurance case. There's also research opportunities more in privacy risk, doing quantitative measurements and trying to figure out how to measure risk, how to measure residual risk, how to measure tolerance, what is okay versus a societal benefit. So also the IOPD has, we're starting up monthly privacy engineering fireside chats with experts. So if you would like to come share your expertise, this isn't a presentation. It would be something where you would send an article in advance, and then we would have our members query you and ask you stuff. We're also looking for beta companies, so if you know any companies interested who are really privacy forward and would like to put a seal of approval on their thing, please let us know. Join the IOPD. You can find us at instituteofprivacydesign.org or reach out to me via email or on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jason. And I'm up now, and Rob is up after me. So I see Rob furiously finishing his slides. We'll see if he's succeeded at that. So I wanted to give you a sneak preview of an upcoming campaign that the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, is running on trying to get more Tor relays running at universities around the world. So we have maybe 12 or 15 or something examples right now. There are Tor relays running at MIT, CMU, Waterloo, Boston University, Cambridge University, Technical University Berlin, Karlstadt, and so on. But that's just a handful. There are also other organizations like Georgetown and Minnesota and Michigan that are running other pieces of Tor infrastructure, like major snowflake bridges and default bridges. So these are all a good start. There are three main arguments for why you should have a Tor relay at your university. They come down to education, community, and research. So what do I mean on the education side? There are a couple of different arguments: providing hands-on cybersecurity experience, showing students other career paths. They don't all have to go to Google and Facebook. There are civil society organizations out there that matter. Getting students thinking about global policy and law and society rather than just the technical side. Helping people refine their privacy advocacy skills, so you get to talk to the general counsel and the sysadmin and teach them how the internet works as an education opportunity. And then on the community side, connecting students groups to professors, to research groups. So you as a professor are always looking for that excited student, and somewhere at your university is an excited student who wants to run a Tor relay there. And then supporting freedom of speech, freedom of learning. That's what your universities are supposed to be about. They're all about making the world a better place where more people understand things. And from the community side on Tor, increasing capacity of the Tor network, making it stronger for everybody. And then from the research side, the third angle of this, helping the Tor network stay strong so people can do research. You remember Planet Lab long ago, where in order to use Planet Lab, you had to run part of Planet Lab? We don't make you run part of the Tor network, but it's the ethical thing to do if you write research papers on privacy and anonymity. Something like Tor should continue to exist. And maybe it gives you a competitive advantage where you can tell incoming grad students or faculty that your university does run a Tor relay. So maybe that's a difference in when they're choosing. And then the last part, having access to your own Tor relay for research, which is complicated. If you want to do your own research on your own Tor relay, talk to us about the Tor Research Safety Board. And with that, please think about, if you're a professor, would you like to run a relay at your university? It doesn't have to be an exit relay. It can be a non-exit relay. And mostly that's just a question of bandwidth and a computer and an IP address and talking to your sysadmins. And if you're a student, find a professor, convince them. And if you haven't found a match, talk to me. I would love to connect you to other people at your university to help you make it happen. Awesome. And with that, thank you, and I'm going to pass it to Rob going next, and after Rob is Eric.
Hello, I'm Rob from the Naval Research Lab. I'm going to give a quick Shadow update. So what is Shadow? Shadow is a hybrid emulator simulator. It helps you run applications in an easy-to-use environment. Shadow.github.io is the place you should go if you want to learn more. It helps with a variety of things, rapid prototyping, flexible evaluations, testing and debugging, and it's safe and private, completely on a single machine. Okay. We have a complete redesign from what you probably think of as Shadow. Shadow now runs unmodified binaries, which allows us to really run them as separate processes and create sandboxes around the processes so that we can enforce syscall interposition. So this is a much better design than the previous one that we had earlier. And there's a new TCP stack, and fork and exec are coming soon, so this should make it even easier to run anything you want inside of Shadow. I want to make the point that Shadow is not Tor specific, although this is a common misconception. You can really run any Linux binary. So here's an example running Python 3 as a web server and curl to fetch application or fetch pages from the Python web server. So you really just give it a path to a binary and it will run that thing over a simulated network for you. So that you can really quickly set up networks and do some testing. So this is good for things like distributed networks like MixNets, distributed consensus protocols, peer-to-peer networks, blockchain, client-server systems, Tor, or your favorite Apple system. Shadow 3.0 just came out. We have a lot better performance. We've found an issue in the scheduler that, did this. And because of this, we started looking at what kind of metric do we need to use to actually, this was such a big performance increase that we decided to come up with a new metric, and that's degrees. So being the scientist that I am, I decided to get my protractor out and actually do a really good job measuring this, and we found that this is actually a 34-degree improvement. And due to Oakland, S&P's new submission acceptance model, where they accepted like 30% of their papers, this is actually under submission to S&P, this new metric. So we'll see how that goes. More seriously, all the thanks goes to the programmers we hired as part of our NSF project, Jim Newsom from the Tor project, Stephen Engler from Georgetown University, and Ryan Wales from NRL. They've been doing most of the coding. I'm just the ringleader. Our funding runs out in September, so if anyone has any opportunities that they think this would fit for further funding, let me know. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you, Rob. And Eric is up now, and Stephen is up after that. And Stephen, if you haven't filled out a release form, now is a great time.
Hi, so I'm just here. I'm Eric. I am the founder of Geth, which is a trust minimizing censorship circumvention tool. I'm also the founder of Mel, which is a root of trust blockchain for non-blockchain distributed systems. So I want to talk about one observation I had. Coming from the pet security community and entering the kind of crypto Web3 community after I started working on Mel, which is that there's two senses in which people use the word censorship resistance. The first sense, which people in this room probably are more familiar with, is about preventing banning the protocol by ISPs, by states, et cetera. This is what we mean when we talk about censorship-resistant Tor, pluggable transports, steganography, plausible deniability, et cetera. Now, another sense you see a lot in kind of like the crypto world is what I could also call filter resistance, which is preventing discrimination against particular uses. The idea that if you use Monero, nobody knows who you're talking to and sending money to, but when you use Bitcoin, you do. It's all about, can the infrastructure of this network prevent some users from using it, but let other people use it? And there you don't talk about steganography, you talk about encryption, zero knowledge, things like that. Now, the really confusing thing is that these two censorship resistances are completely orthogonal, but they have the same name, and it causes confusion. In my work on Geth, I see a lot of community members make claims like, oh, ITP can't be blocked in China because it's peer-to-peer and decentralized. It actually can be blocked. It's pretty easy to block. You also see people in security claim to say things like, censorship-resistant crypto is obviously a scam because I can just block it on any ISP. But then they're saying censorship-resistant in a completely different sense. And can we have both? It is actually quite nice to have both because filter-resistant technology, such as end-to-end encryption and cryptocurrency, is less useful if your adversary can just ban it. I can just say, use this insecure protocol or else. But ban-resistant technologies, such as Tor, is also scary if you need to really trust some central authority to have access to it. But having both is really, really hard. On one hand, decentralization and encryption is basically the silver bullet for filter resistance, for kind of resisting discrimination, because you don't have an authority to enforce filtering, and nobody knows what your users are doing because everything's encrypted. On the other hand, our best ban-resistant systems rely fundamentally on trust and centralization. You have things like Tor bridge distribution, which assumes that some centralized authority who knows all the bridges can carefully make sure that no one user sees everything, but they have to see everything. You also have systems like collateral freedom or decoy routing, where you hitch your security onto some trusted third party that's too big to block, but also not under the censor's control. Typically, it's websites like GitHub or CDNs or things like that. So unfortunately, I don't really see a lot of projects that are working on combining these two properties. So I very recently started this project called Arendelle. It's an experimental project that's built under the Mel umbrella. And the idea here is to build a ban-resistant and filter-resistant decentralized communication network. And the basic idea is that on one hand, it can't discriminate against people doing certain things or saying certain things on it. On the other hand, it should work even if the whole world is under some sort of system like China. It expressly tries to prevent your ISP from knowing that you're using this network at all. And so roughly the technology I use is a Sphinx-style MixNet plus link-by-link pluggable transports, and an invite-only friend-to-friend routing system. So if you're interested, here's the website, the GitHub, and the Discord. And I would love for people to see whether they can contribute to this project. It's very early. It's mostly in the brainstorming stage. I would love to find any possible collaborators on this project. So yeah, so that's my talk. How can you build an actually censorship-resistant decentralized network? Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Stephen is up now. Bailey is up after that, and Kai is up after that.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Stephen Murdoch from University College London. The conference has talked a lot about anonymous communication system, and as best as anyone can tell, there is a fundamental trade-off between latency and high security. So we can have something like Tor, which is low latency, but if you can observe both sides, you can carry out correlation attacks. If you can observe the user, you can carry out website fingerprinting attacks. That's not good. We've known this for a while. There's other systems out there, Mixmaster, Mixminion. They delay messages for hours, if not days. The problem is that is not what most users are used to. So although it can give good security, in practice it doesn't because nobody uses them. Then you've got the people who are trying to find in-between route. So we've got Loopix and NIM. This is going to delay messages for seconds, maybe minutes. Gives you better security than Tor, all other things being equal, but it has the potential for far more users. But still, if you could push up the latency, then you could improve the security. But how do we make applications tolerant to that? So there's another community which is looking at how do you build collaborative applications in a better way. This is a reaction to what's now the modern way of building applications. You don't start with the client, you start with the server. You then build some API on top of that, normally JSON, and then you have your client, which is normally a web browser or Electron, and then that sits on top of this client-server application, even when it doesn't really need to be client-server. The downside of this is that if there's latency between the client and the server, the usability often becomes quite terrible. If you're disconnected from the server, then your application stops working. And also if messages get reordered, then the whole application stops working. So how to deal with this? Well, you can have a centralized server that reorders messages, make sure they're all in the same order. That is incompatible with end-to-end encryption. Or you can add on some degraded mode to do some of the tasks when you are not connected to the network. And that makes things more complex, and it's not nice to degrade people's usability. So the reaction to this is local first applications. So this is inspired by mobile first. So the idea behind mobile first is you design for your mobile phone, and then it's going to be much better in the web browser rather than the other way around. This argues that you should design things to work on the local machine first, and then when you build it on top of a network, it's going to be better. And one of the technologies they use is something called a conflict-free replicated data type. This is a data structure which can be synchronized between different users, and it is resilient to messages being reordered, and it's resilient to high latency or even partial disconnection of these nodes. And because of that, it works well with peer-to-peer application, it works well with end-to-end encryption. You can use your application locally. The experience of it is going to be the same as any other local app, but when you're connected to the network, there'll be some sort of synchronization, and you can collaborate with other people who are using the same app, or you on a different computer, or however you're building your distributed systems. The advantage from this is you can run this on top of an anonymous communication system. You can have high latency, and it's going to work much better, I suspect, than the old modern way of building applications. So I think this is an interesting opportunity. The tools are much more mature. If you can think of interesting applications that you could build on top of this, then let me know. The sorts of things I'm thinking of is something where collaboration is closer than just email, because then you might as well just use email, that's fine. But also not so close that people are editing the same paragraph of a message, because then people will tread on each other's toes. So there hopefully is going to be a sweet spot between that, and then we can build some interesting applications, and then we can make those more secure. Okay. And finally, we're hiring. I'm surprised I'm the first person to say this. So UCL is centre of London, middle of the tech community, Amazon, Google, Apple, all around us. We're hiring at all levels, so assistant professor equivalent, associate professor, potentially professor. No job advert yet, coming out soon, but if you're interested, then have a look at this website and or talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Stephen. Bailey's up next. Kai is up after that. And I'm going to jump in and say, Stephen runs a Tor relay at UCL. Be cool like Stephen.
All right, I have no beautiful slides for you, but that's what happens when you impulsively talk to Roger during the coffee break. For those who don't know me, I'm Bailey Kacsmar. If you've received a lot of emails from an artifact person, that was probably me, and it's totally okay if that's not how you thought my name was said. Nobody thinks that. And I'm an assistant professor at the University of Alberta. What I work on is what I call human-centered private computation protocols, which is my short way of saying, yes, I build things and look at attacks for things like private set intersection and privacy and machine learning, but I also have this line of research that looks at user studies and seeing if we can communicate the things that we're building to the people whose data is actually going into these systems. So we can hopefully build better systems that are more in line with the needs and expectations of those individuals. However, in the next minute, there are 3 things I want to talk about. First, I need to do a poll. I don't know exactly, since we're a pretty wide geographic region, but I think in general we can all agree it's been rather warm here in Switzerland this week. And sometimes when it's really warm, or at least this is what happens in Canada, you start to miss winter. And so, right now seems like a really good time for me to say hello to all of the bachelor students or master's students who might be looking to become master's students or PhDs in Edmonton, Canada. So if you're interested in any of the work I just mentioned, feel free to talk to me. And if you think cold sounds pretty good right now, but you've already done the PhD thing, there is also a postdoc position opening right now at the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, where you will work with 2 AME fellows. So you could work with me and one of my colleagues, or just pick your favorite 2 AME fellows to apply with. And again, come be a little colder for a few years. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bailey. Kai is up now, and Niels is up after that.
Oh, hi everyone. So my name is Kai. I'm probably the newest guy here that work in privacy. So I just joined the University of Edinburgh 2 months ago. So it's like a completely new field to me. And I'm gonna do a brief introduction of myself and then talk about what I do now. So this is just a brief like listing of what I have been through. So I got my bachelor's degree in China and my master's degree in the US, and I've worked in the industry for 3 years after I got my master's. So I worked in Intel and Huawei for 3 years as machine learning engineer. So what I work on basically is to optimize machine learning models on CPUs and GPUs. And then I figured it's kind of boring to be in the industry. So I decided to come back to the academia, and I applied to University of Edinburgh, and I successfully got in. So right now I'm working on machine learning and privacy. So I'm lucky to work with Mark, and I just joined in May, so this is my very first PETS. I'm kind of intimidated, but also excited. And my research is basically focused on privacy in machine learning. So these are some photos that I take of University of Edinburgh. It's a very beautiful city, so if you have never been there, I strongly encourage you to visit when you get a chance. And it's quite nice place, and I'm enjoying my time there. So if you got a chance, please visit us, and we can hang out. So we're right now primarily looking into the relationship between differential privacy and fairness. So it's a very intricate problem, and we're trying to decompose different factors that might lead to the fairness issues that come out of applying DP in your machine learning models. So in 2019, there's this paper that come out and talks about how differential privacy can have disparate impact on model accuracy for different groups. So in the left figure, you can see that there's only a little bit of accuracy disparity for the standard American English group and African American English group. But when you apply DP, the difference in accuracy is getting exacerbated, and it's stronger when the privacy guarantee is lower. So on the right, you can see similar trend for the species classification, and we're trying to sort of decompose the problem by looking into different factors, such as the dataset quality and how you design a model and the hyperparameters and all the settings of DP, all those things. So if you're working on or interested in similar research directions, please do get in touch. And here's my email address and my personal page. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kai. Niels is up now, and Kevin is up after that.
Hi, I'm Niels. I'm working on the sigsum.org project, and I want to give you the extended elevator pitch for our project. Just please imagine this hall is an extended elevator. So let's start with the easiest use case, automatic install of software updates. You have a device or a computer or a server, and it downloads some update, and it's signed, and it is installed automatically, and you're all happy. And since it was signed, it's secure, and you have the same updates as everyone else. That's fine. Except if you happen to have some resourceful enemies that might have compromised the signing key or pressured some insiders at the developer to sign a rogue update just for you. So how do you deal with this kind of attack? One approach is to use transparency logs. And the thing is that a transparency log does not in any way prevent this attack. The aim is to make it detectable, and in that way, hopefully also deterring the attacker from doing this thing. So what's a transparency log? It's a data structure where you can add things, you can add new entries, you can't delete them, you can't modify them. And SigSum is a minimalistic instantiation of a transparency log for signed checksums. So the records that are stored in SigSum is basically a hash of the message to be logged, the submitter's signature, and the hash of the corresponding public key. So anyone can submit new messages to the logs, and they will be added to the log and publicly accessed. Back to the software update problem. The way this is to be used, you have this signature of the software update package. You extend that with a proof of public logging of the signature. And this can be verified offline, and it will be checked together with the signature, and if it doesn't validate, the update is refused. And then at the other end of this system, the owner of the key in question, as well as another interested stakeholders, will monitor the log and check for signatures by this key. And then they can raise the alarm if there are any signatures with this key in the log that are not expected to be there. And this gives the good properties here, that if an attacker attempts to do this rogue update attack, either they properly log it, then the update will be accepted, but it will be detected by the monitors after the fact. Or if the attacker attempts to omit to not log it, then the update will be refused. So that's the the ID, and this is similar for other transparency log applications as well, that you do detection of after the problem has happened. Now, this might make the log server itself a easy target for attack. And to address this, we also have witness co-signatures. So the proof of public logging includes the co-signature for one or more witnesses. And then the system will still be secure, assuming that K of N of the witnesses are honest and not compromised. And it doesn't matter for security if the log server itself is compromised, because if the log misbehaves, the witnesses will stop co-signing. So an attacker that compromises the log can make a denial of service attack on this system, but can't force you to accept an undetectable update. So that's sigsum.org. Go to the site for specs and contact information. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Niels. Kevin is up now. Sebastian is up after that.
All right. Hello, everybody. This talk is going to be a little bit different. My name is Kevin. I am an assistant professor at the Nova School of Science and Technology outside of Lisbon, Portugal. But I'm also a member of an organization called PrivacyLx, which actually does a little bit of direct action and talking to people, everyday people on the streets about privacy by hosting events. And I would like to start my talk with a takeaway. Why not? So a potential takeaway from this talk would be that, in my opinion, we need privacy people to interface with the general public, and not just using things like papers and publications as their way of getting ideas out there, because people in the general public don't read papers and publications, but they need this information all the same, at least some of it, some subsection of it. And they're interested in it. And in order to argue for these things, I'm going to talk about my experiences with talking with people and why I believe this is more needed. So in order to do that, I'm going to talk about PrivacyLx. We're a not-for-profit association based in Lisbon, Portugal. And we do a whole bunch of things. Basically, the things that we do mostly are talking with the general public about different privacy technologies. We are a small organization. We are 4 years old. We somehow survived the pandemic, despite having literally no attendance on any of our virtual events except for members only. Not by design, simply because nobody joined. But back when we went in person, people started joining again, and that's fantastic. We only have around 15 members. Nobody gets paid at PrivacyLx because we have no money. We're just a whole bunch of volunteers who are really interested and love talking with people and love the things that we do. So what do we do? Well, people think that in all of our conversations, they show up and we go, hey, everybody, use Signal, use Tor, thanks, event over, see you next time. But generally, that's not how it works. We do talk about Signal, we do talk about Tor, these are incredibly important things, but we like to also give context. Now, I'm not expecting that you actually read all of this because this is a 5-minute talk, but we do discussions on many different things, including defining privacy, what it is, considerations, threats, threat modeling, personalized ads, different software, including Tor and Signal browser add-ons for people whose threat models are maybe a little less severe. We do data collection on things like GDPR violations inside of Portugal, illegal surveillance cameras in the streets, illegal refusal of cash. You must, as a business, accept cash in Portugal, and if you don't, and we find out about it, we'll contact you and say, hey, please, you're violating the law. Please don't do that. And getting people to consider privacy a little bit more seriously. We also do translations of technologies into European Portuguese that don't have translations. So some members of our team have translated Secure Drop into European Portuguese. We do privacy cafes as our main event. And I want to talk a little bit about the power of these sorts of things, because sometimes people show up and they already know what you're talking about. And then it's just a whole bunch of people who know the same thing in the same room. But one anecdote that I have about the power of these sorts of things is at one point a journalist did show up to our one of our privacy cafes, as we call them, which is just, we do discussions about privacy, usually themed around a thing, and said, hey, I don't know what the implication of this is, but I was crossing into a nation and they confiscated my phone. And they said the nation, and it was Israel, and Israel is a little bit famous for malware that can go on phones. And we said, oh, okay, so please tell us you don't have the phone in the room. And they said, no, of course I have the phone in the room. Why wouldn't I have the phone in the room? And we said, okay, all right. And then someone else in the audience, not part of the organization, said, I work with people who are experts in these types of malware and forensics that work in these things. So we then paired these people together, and they went off and they did forensics in a corner of the room, while the rest of us were talking to the other people who showed up about what privacy rights the GDPR gives you. And I think this is the power of these sorts of events and why privacy people should host these events, because it can bring these people who need each other better together, right? The journalists need somebody to talk to about their privacy concerns, and the forensics people needs a way to reach out to journalists who may have been affected, and we can be kind of a bridge in that gap. We've done a lot of other things like translating, creating reports. I think I'm running out of time, so thank you everybody, and I would like to end again with my takeaway. Please organize these events and do these sorts of things because it is very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Sebastian is up now, and Harry is up after that. And Harry, now is a perfect time to sign your consent form if you haven't already.
Okay, so if you have been at the location privacy, you might have seen a paper talking about PWS Cup, which is a privacy challenge. So in the privacy community, we have seen in the last year a few competitions where basically people try to either develop or attack anonymization algorithm. However, setting such a competition is usually very time consuming. You need a lot of people, a lot of resources, a lot of thinking. So one thing we try to do with Snake is basically to develop a framework that people can reuse to do competition, where basically you focus on attacks. So we imagine that we have already state-of-the-art anonymization methods that have been published at PET or other place, and we will want people to focus more on attacking. So for instance, if your method is differentially private, this can help to audit what is a lower bound on privacy, or maybe it can help to develop new attack. And basically to show that the framework can be useful, we instantiate it with the first edition of the challenge on membership inference attack on synthetic data. And this is currently open on the Codabots platform. So basically, synthetic data is the situation where you have real data and you train a generative model to produce synthetic data, which is supposed to reproduce some of the characteristics of the original data. And usually, if you want to have strong privacy guarantee, you will do it with differentially private methods. But to evaluate also the privacy, you can do empirical attacks. For instance, you can try to do membership inference attack, where your goal is based on a profile on a target to decide whether it was in the training data of the synthetic model. And so what we do in Snake, basically we have the original data from which we prepare some base data. From this data, which we give to all participants, so everybody has the same knowledge, we sample some trained data, and then we use different synthetic data method. And then the objective of the people which attack the synthetic data is basically to deduce for some of the target whether is a member or not of the training set of the generative model. So we basically took 3 state-of-the-art methods which are differentially private, one which is MST, Pategan, and PrivBase. And basically the focus is to attack some data which was synthesized based on census data. So our objective was to have data that look like adults that a lot of people already use, but not the original adults, to be sure that everybody starts with the same advantage and no knowledge or work on the data. And so basically a target in Snake is not just one individual, but we try to change a little bit the focus on households, which could be several individuals. And we use membership advantage to measure the success of the attack. So if you are interested in participating, you can look at this Codabench link, but I will also put it on the announcement on the Zulip. And we are planning next Monday to do online Zoom for people to ask questions and maybe start to also work on the challenge if you are interested. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Sebastian. We've got Harry up now, and Wouter will bring it home, wherever you are.
Okay, so I'll keep this quick without slides. If anyone's interested in MixNets, I haven't seen any MixNet papers at this PETS conference, which is unusual, particularly given the amount of SMPC papers. We do have a working MixNet called NIM, NYM. For those of you who are interested, it's a stratified MixNet, stratified topology MixNet. We coded in Rust, so it has TypeScript and Rust APIs. Unlike Tor, we incentivize the nodes, so we pay them in a thing called NIM token, which you can indeed trade for about 20 cents right now if you're so inclined. And effectively, we have raised venture capital funding from Andreessen Horowitz and others, so we have a team of about 30 programmers and about 20 other people involved in the project. We raised about 50 million, so we're not going anywhere anytime soon. So I think it's pretty exciting. We have a real-world MixNet. You can send any kind of traffic over it. Right now, people are mostly sending this over things where MixNet makes sense for it, such as, for example, Bitcoin, Zcash, Monero from the cryptocurrency space. Also, instant messaging traffic, like Telegram traffic, is probably our most popular use case. The users seem to be mostly in Ukraine and Russia, with a fair amount in Turkey. And we're just kind of, we did build the initial work for this from the Panoramics European Commission project, but we decided that kind of VC funding provided kind of more bang for the buck than continuing to ask the European Commission for funding. So if you're interested in the design, Claudia Diaz is our chief scientist. She's here. Many of you know her. We also still, weirdly enough, have George Denises on the payroll. And Anya Petrowska, who you may know from Lupix, and Alfredo have joint work representing Tomorrow on how to pay for NIM using essentially a anonymous eCash scheme, because if you want to pay for NIM or pay nodes, you don't want people to be doxxed by virtue of paying. So anyways, if you're interested, we fund PhD students, work a lot with Carmela at EPFL. We're interested in working with other universities. And we do also take interns and hire developers with a particular interest right now in censorship resistance, because we are currently blocked in China, which is irritating, and we feel Tor's pain. We do think Tor and NIM can coexist very successfully. Tor is ideal for synchronous circuit-based traffic like web browsing. NIM, MixNet probably makes a bit more sense for things that can tolerate a bit more latency, packet-based asynchronous networking. And it's, I think, better than I2P, but we can argue about MixNets versus I2P later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Harry. And our final speaker is Wouter.
Hello, everyone. I realize that I'm in the unfortunate position of standing between all of you and a glorious dinner, so I'll keep it short and sweet. I work on end-to-end privacy-preserving systems, going sort of from crypto systems aspects as well as how users perceive these. I recently started a faculty position at CISPA, and I'm looking both for PhD students and postdocs, so if this sounds like something you might be interested in working on, please let me know. This worked very well for me 6 years ago, so getting a postdoc position, so maybe it will work for you as well. Thank you so much.
Great. Okay, and because we're in Switzerland, we're essentially on time. Thank you to all the speakers, and thank you to our nice volunteers over here who made it work.